Good morning, and hey now, PASW staff, clients, and friends joining us for Wednesday. Okay, yesterday was Schubert. So, one of the greatest classical composers of all time. Did all that before age 31. And one of the greatest songwriters, And then your film scoring results are in for Surviving Picasso. Can't wait to show you that for Friday. So today we're going to jazz it up a little bit. We're going to look at one of my favorite jazz composers, but also a lot of people's. We're going to look at Charlie Mingus. I think we brought up Mingus a few times, perhaps. I'm not sure, but he fits in very nicely to our jazz history that we've been looking at together. Born in 1922, dies in 1979. Only lived till about 56 years old. He died from ALS, and he was a huge force, and not only because he was obese, but completely angry, passionate. There would be nobody like Mingus, and we're going to look at his life and about and listen, most importantly, and listen to a lot of the wonderful music that's come out of this guy's mind. So let's get away from the Red Sea, away from Egypt, and let's go to let's go to Watts. What do you think? Yeah, Watts in LA, which is not far away from where we go to school. He's actually born in Arizona, Nogales, Arizona, but he grows up in Watts, goes to Jordan High School, and he's known for being a bass player, but he's so much more than that. And I think what I like about him so much is that he really was a great composer, and he used the bass as a vehicle to write wonderful music, not only for jazz ensembles, but for orchestras as well. His mom really only allows church-related music in the house, but Mingus listens to something on the radio by Duke Ellington, who we looked at. Duke's the king, right? He's the greatest. And when he heard Duke Ellington at around age 8 or 9, he decided, okay, music is going to be his thing. And he studied trombone, but then went into cello. And cello was his first main instrument. And if we look at, cello and bass have some similarities. They're both string instruments. He tries to get music lessons, but, because of those times and in that neighborhood, classical music education was not given to black students, it's in the neighborhood. I mean, as unfortunate as it is to say, that was the truth. So, but he persevered. He quickly joined youth orchestras, and he taught himself how to, and then he did take classical composition, but a black kid at Jordan High School, it was rough, I can't even say what was going on there, but he excelled, to say the least. He was in love with music, and he didn't care that his lack of education and his lack of being white would hinder this. So he practiced all day on the cello and on the bass. He gets out of Watts, though, because, where is most of this jazz music happening? In the 40s and 50s, all of jazz, all of bebop, all of the stuff we've been talking about is all in New York City. That's where he's going to go. And he's going to meet up with people that we already know. He's going to meet up with Charlie Parker, and he plays with Charlie Parker, and he's going to meet up with Miles Davis. Let's get a timeline up here. You see Duke up there. You see, Django Reinhardt's, in Europe, and he's before this, hundreds of years past Mozart and Beethoven and people we've looked at. And he's going to be really playing and composing a lot of music in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But he's playing with Bud Powell, who we did a class on, the genius pianist, and even Duke Ellington. He's getting to play with his idol. And he's playing bass in these ensembles and these things, but he quickly develops a jazz workshop where they are allowing experimentation in this workshop. Not only freer and longer solos, but also he's he was a much better soloist, and I don't mean jazz soloist on the bass, although he was terrific on the bass. He's becoming a leader, and usually you don't have, when you see a leader of a band, usually it's the singer, right? Or the guitar player, or the piano player even. You don't see a bass being the leader. I don't know why, because if you took out the bass, the music would be very empty. It wouldn't sound good. But his force on the stage, his force with the ensemble, with his presence and with his playing, I mean, he was so good that he wouldn't use a piano player many times. And that's really hard because piano gives you harmony, right? It gives you the chords. Bass can only play one note at a time, but he's playing the bass in such a way where the soloists don't really they can hear the harmonies that he's playing. And, the walking bass pattern lines, they're going by so fast. And it's not just random notes, boom, boom, but he's outlining harmony just like a piano player would with his left hand going up and down the bass. That's already crazy. But he takes a real interest in classical music at a young age because he's starting to write music. In fact, one of my most favorite pieces was a piece that he wrote when he was 17 years old called Half-Mast Inhibition. They recorded it 22 years later. And I just think there's some wonderful music in here that's not jazz, that's not classical. He's a little bit part of third stream music, and we haven't talked about third stream. Third stream is in a nutshell, it's a combination of jazz and classical music. So jazz, classical, right? Third stream. Some of it was really innovative. Gunther Schuller is kind of the father of third stream, and he conducted a lot of Mingus's stuff. Some of it can sound, I feel like Mingus did a really good job of making it sound still melodic and still like great music, where it was hard to put a label on it. Instead of experimenting with, jazz and classical together, isn't that great? Yeah, but nobody wants to hear that, it's boring. He really put this together where it was like, well, wow, you really do hear the colorful harmonies, the melodies coming out. It was still music, and that's why I think he transcended jazz music. He was an amazing pianist too. I mean, he could have been a piano player just as well as a bass player. His piano solo album is just beautiful. I mean, it's just him all on solo piano, and he sounds just as good as other pianists. And you can hear his melodic compositions. A lot of them are standards. A lot of them are his own original compositions. I don't know how much he wrote down, but I know that they were his songs and that they were his arrangements. I don't know but I know, like Duke Ellington, he would write specifically for musicians and is involved, particularly his love for Eric Dolphy. And we talked about Eric Dolphy, I mean, maybe the first week of classes, but the genius saxophone, bass clarinetist soloist, who also wrote music. But he would write, and so he'd have a big band, but instead of writing alto 1, alto 2, trumpet 1, trumpet 2, that's how you do it in a score. He would just write the names on top because he would know exactly how they would sound, who would play this, but they were playing his arrangements. And in 1956, he comes out with Pithecanthropus Erectus, and this is one of his first big works as a band leader, as a composer, as somebody who's not just playing jazz standards, which is traditional. You know, we have Bill Evans Trio. They're playing traditional, not harmonies, but traditional songs with the melody, soloing, and then the melody again. Those are the tracks. Mingus is doing way freer things, but still keeping track of what his audience wants to hear. Still being very much, still recognizing that the music's still got to sound good, just like Duke Ellington, right? It's still got to swing. It's one thing to be a little experimental and stuff, but it's still got to have that really good music. So he's fusing or infusing one of those words, hard bop jazz. We looked at hard bop with Lee Morgan, and modal jazz with Miles Davis. With gospel music, he's incorporating it in, and blues he's doing, and also Mexican folk music. I mean, listen to this. So it's hard to classify. I mean, he's a jazz musician, but he's using, and he spent a lot of time in Mexico. I think in some brothels, but I mean, okay, if that inspired him, that's okay too. But there's no one. It's very hard to categorize his music. So this is he's kind of part of this third stream music going on, where it's just completely ahead of its time. He was a very they called him an angry person, because and then why wouldn't you be, though? I mean, if first of all, if you're a black musician, the racism in New York at that time, and the drug addiction, and the complacent police, perhaps, I mean, of course there's rage. So you hear him yelling on the recordings. He was very famous for just stopping the music at some of these clubs and getting upset at the audience for talking, and saying, you wouldn't do this at a classical concert, why are you doing this here? He was although, like, I do remember reading in his book that he would be playing, but when the time when his steak that he had ordered at the restaurant was ready, then it was delivered to him, and then he'd stop the music and eat his steak, because that's he loved food, and he struggled with obesity and he was reinventing himself a lot, not just with his waistline reinventing, but a little bit. He would come out with new albums all the time. I mean, he came out with about 100 albums and wrote probably 300 compositions. It was so prolific, and such an intellectual. Was always reading Dostoevsky, going to see French films. He was important to me because when I was in high school, I was so into jazz, but he was one of the first, when I read a book about him, he was the first guy in 10th grade where he wanted to make me become smarter and more of an intellectual. He was such an intellectual with his philosophizing, he was so well read. He was an iconoclastic performer and thinker, and I always loved that about him. Married 4 times, was very rich, but then blew a lot of his money. I mean, again, it's sometimes it's hard to blame, because the system, the oppression, all of these things were against him, and he was really fighting for his music to get a larger audience. Here's another good example of him using classical music. So he takes this Rachmaninoff piece, very famous Rachmaninoff piece that all the classical people know, and he starts the song. I mean, he starts the song with Rachmaninoff, and then listen quickly what it goes into. It goes into Jerome Kern's All the Things You Are, which is a jazz standard. Just that example right there is him saying, I'm going through it doesn't matter. I'm not just a jazz bass player. I'm a composer, and I know about classical music too. And I'm going to take classical music and I'm going to put it in here. I mean, it was just, he was in a candy store of stealing, for lack of a better word, stealing all people's kinds of music, getting ideas, getting different sounds, always working. Just a massive talent. Charlie Mingus, I love that guy. And some of my favorite compositions and songs are because of this wonderful man. So that's Charlie Mingus. Now we know about him, and hope you enjoyed his genius. What a life. What a creative mind. Yeah, I'm still very much in love with him.
So interesting to see Duke was Mingus's biggest influence. Not the first jazz musician where Duke was the king for a lot of people and got him. And, this guy just went to Jordan, in Watts, Jordan High School, and then played cello. And then, he had to get out of there, go to New York. Interesting to see that. And also interesting as a bass guy to be a band leader, playing the bass. And he was such a good bassist to lead a band playing that big instrument. The bass, when you think about it, and I rented a bass one summer in junior high. It's huge to lug around. It's so heavy, it's hard to carry it around everywhere. It's not just a horn, where you can just, or a guitar you can just put in your case and walk or run around from gig to gig. A bass is huge. So, to be a leader, he had such command of that instrument too. And also third string music, we've talked about that mixture of jazz and classical where the idea sounds interesting, and then when you hear it, you're like, okay, the idea is interesting, but his music sounds really musical and melodic, and that's what I loved about Mingus's music. So hope you enjoyed that. Okay, tomorrow we're going to go to LA, even though we're here already. We're going to look more about it. Okay, have a great rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Bye.